Hi, this is Dr. C with your video lecture for week 2. I want to start off by apologizing for this lecture appearing just a little bit later than I really wanted to have it appear. But I wanted to go through all of the assignments that you've submitted before this point to kind of talk at least briefly about them in this video lecture, and it took me a little bit of time because there's quite a fair amount of writing that you've submitted since last week, as you well know. So I've gone through, I think, all but maybe just 5 or 6 or 7 or so of the initial reflections, but everything else I've gone through, and it all looks pretty good. Overall, I think you're all getting the thrust of the course. I'm really glad that we began with that Lost Art of Argument video. It seems to have done the trick in helping all of you develop a sense of the kind of work that we're doing in this class, the kind of argumentation that you're engaged in on the college university level, as well as how the ways in which you've been taught written argumentation before might differ from the ways in which you're going to be taught written argumentation in this course. Now, I think you've already received instructions in the form of I think the instructions for the sharing assignment that you did last week, which thank you for those of you that were able to post your work. Thank you so much for doing so. I think those instructions included a step where you go back to the forum in which you submitted that sharing assignment and take a look at the assignments that were submitted there to make sure. I'm going to take a quick look at this to make sure I'm not telling you to do something that you can't do. Let's see. Oh, no, looks like you've already started doing it. Great. If you haven't already gone back to that sharing assignment and taken a look at the assignments that you see submitted there and clicked on the like button, the little thumbs up button, next to any essays that you see that were submitted in that sharing assignment that resemble the kind of argumentative essay that you will be writing in this class, so essay 1 and essay 2. If you want to take a look at those prompts, what they ask you to do on a fundamental level, the way that they ask you to use research, especially for the second essay, essay 2, the way they ask you to use sources as support, the way they the way they imagine or conceptualize this work as being inquiry-driven and thesis-driven. You can use those your understanding of those essays and how they will work and how they must be constructed to go back to that sharing assignment to look through what's been submitted there, and if you see anything that looks kind of like what you'll be doing in this class for those essays, just click the like button next to that essay. This will have two purposes. It serves two purposes at once. Number one, it sort of familiarizes you with the work of your peers, and number two, it allows me to assess whether you have a fairly strong understanding of the major assignments that you'll be engaged in working on in this course, so that if anyone has like an erroneous understanding, and I can sort of pick up on whether the class has that generally good understanding, solid understanding of those assignments. If that's not the case, then I can always, in one of these video lectures or through an announcement or a message or something, I can try to get us back on the right track. So it's important, if you haven't done that already, please go ahead and do that as soon as possible. Today I kind of wanted to talk about, I'm looking off to my notes on another screen, I'm not looking out the window just in case you're wondering. Today, for our video lecture for week 2, we have a few things I wanted to mention. I want to talk about critical reading, give you sort of like the nuts and bolts of critical reading, and give you some advice when it comes to that, as well as reasoning, which is an important part of critical reading. I'll briefly discuss enthymemes, what they are, and how they, what their relationship is between enthymemes and thesis statements. We'll be working on enthymemes next week, so this will just be sort of a preliminary heads up as to what they are and how they work. I'll also be discussing some details on your upcoming assignments, the reading analysis number 1, which is due at the end of this week, and the synthesis essay, which is due next week. So I'll start at the beginning with critical reading and reasoning. Now, one of the things that students tend to have a lot of difficulty with when they come into composition courses, that includes writing 121 and 122 and 123, is that they usually arrive in these courses without a very strong apparatus set up for annotating or note-taking. Annotating means note-taking, right? Critical reading, if you want to become very good at critical reading, requires good and disciplined approach to note-taking. Why is that the case? Well, it turns out when we write things down about the things that we're reading, it helps us understand those things more effectively. Sometimes that's because um, uh, we are analyzing the thing that we're reading as we're reading it, and in other words, we're breaking it down to its parts and we're laying out the parts on our notes. Other times, it's because we're synthesizing the thing that we're reading with something else that we've read. So taking notes then becomes an activity where you're trying to establish the connections that exist between two pieces that may or may not speak to directly the same concerns, right? So note-taking can be a very powerful way of rapidly increasing our critical reading skills. Far too students engage in a disciplined and sort of formalized note-taking process. By the end of this term, you will have learned one of those. You will have learned a formalized and disciplined note-taking process. And in this class, that's in the form of the annotated bibliography that's due later in the term. That's basically what that assignment is. But in order for you to improve at that kind of an assignment or at that kind of work, it's I think important for us to analyze what good note-taking sort of like includes, right? If you want to use good note-taking to improve your critical reading skills and your reasoning, then it makes sense, I think, to stop for a second and really think our way through note-taking. For this class, you will find that there are a handful of really important skills basic to really good, strong, disciplined note-taking. One is the ability to summarize an argument. Now, summarizing an argument is very different from paraphrasing an argument, which is another skill that's really important for you to have when it comes to this kind of note-taking, or for you to work on when it comes to this kind of note-taking. It's just skills. The more you do them, the more you work on them, the more you think about them, the better you get at them over time, right? So with summary, for when you're talking about argumentation, all you're really doing when you're summarizing an argument is you're providing a sense of the argument's main assertion or its thesis statement. So if you're able to identify the thesis statement of an argument and restate that thesis statement in a compressed form, that is your summary of the argument. So if you're able to do that, let's say in a sentence or two, most really, really good writers of this kind of written argumentation can summarize an argument in a single sentence. Most students who are learning to become better at this kind of writing can summarize an argument typically in 2, max 3 sentences. So summaries are pretty short. And that's really, again, so when you summarize an argument, essentially what you're doing is you're presenting its thesis statement. When you're sometimes in a summary, you may provide a sense of the reasoning of the argument. In other words, the points that the author raises or brings about or develops to illustrate the validity of their thesis statement. Sometimes you might include a sense of that in your summary, but more often than not, it's just pretty much laying out the thesis statement of the argument. Paraphrasing is different. Paraphrasing accounts for not just what you're arguing, but also for how you're making the argument. In other words, paraphrasing includes a thesis statement, but it also includes a sense of the argument's reasoning. And paraphrasing, if you're going to paraphrase an entire argument, you would begin with a summary of the argument, and then you would you would proceed into sort of a point-by-point breakdown of what the author argues, as well as a sense of how they supported those arguments. That's if you're paraphrasing an entire argument, right? And sometimes you want to do that. It depends on what you're using the argument for. In your essay, if it's a really fundamental source, a source that's really, really, really important to the entire argument that you yourself are making in your essay, the one in which you're using the source for, then you might want to paraphrase that source more kind of fulsomely or holistically, meaning that you present a good, strong sense of the entire argument from the beginning of it to the end. More often than not, what you're doing when you're paraphrasing is that after summarizing an argument, you then go to the part of the argument that you want to draw explicit attention to, and you paraphrase that. So typically speaking, you'll be paraphrasing a page or two at a time out of an argument, or maybe a few paragraphs at a time out of an argument rather than the entire argument itself. And often what you see when people take good notes in which they summarize arguments and paraphrase arguments effectively, with the goal of using those notes to help construct the essay that they're taking the notes for in the first place. Often what you see in good student work like that is that when they bring up a source, they first summarize the argument, then they paraphrase the moment from the source that really supports whatever it is that they're trying to support by bringing the source into their argument in the first place. So if they've said something they need to support, they'll go to the summary of the argument that supports the thing that needs supporting, the claim that they've made that needs supporting, then they'll proceed to a paraphrase of the moment of the argument that really supports whatever it is that they're trying to support, and then they'll refer back to the thing that they've supported. And that last step is called synthesis. Now, there's usually sort of in that process when you go from note-taking to essay writing, often what happens is that summary, paraphrasing, and direct quoting all kind of get mixed up together, right? In student work, especially students that are trying to get better at this kind of writing, what they often do is they might summarize an argument, but they'll just dive immediately into quoted material, right? In more advanced work, those authors tend to know that what they need to do is summarize the argument, then paraphrase the moment or the element of the argument that really sort of speaks directly to supporting the claim or assertion that they've made that needs supporting. And they'll only directly quote if they actually really need the reader to see the original wording of the argument that they're using. Students sort of reverse that process. They may summarize the argument, but they'll then dive directly into quotations, resulting in essays that feature a lot of excessive quoting. And that's the reason that that excessive quoting is there. Typically speaking, it's because students need to work on their paraphrasing skills, which speaks to issues in their note-taking skills. If you were good at note-taking, then you probably would be really good at paraphrasing. You're really good at paraphrasing, you're probably not going to be directly quoting an excessive amount in your essays. So you can see how all these things are connected. And it does go right back to critical reading and reasoning. Like if you're able to use note-taking to help you with your critical reading and reasoning, to be able to look at articles, break them down, to assess the arguments that they're laying out, the validity of the arguments, to maybe work your way through whether the argument is speaking to another argument, whether it's an ethically sound argument in the way that it's made, whether its reasoning is strong. All those things can be arrived at through good, strong, disciplined note-taking, which features, again, summary and paraphrase. Those are two main things. You will often quote in your notes as well, but summary and paraphrase are the two sort of like more difficult when you're using other people's words or ideas. There are three ways in which you have of representing them: summary, paraphrase, direct quotation, right? Those are the three ways that you have of representing them. The easiest of the three is obviously direct quotation. Summary is a little bit easier than paraphrase. Summary and paraphrase are obviously much more difficult than direct quotation. So if you're able to use your note-taking to tunnel into your readings by more effectively summarizing their arguments, by paraphrasing their arguments, and by finding maybe representative quotes from the readings, then I think that would help you become a much better critical reader, because it would force you to sort of slow down and assess the arguments that you're looking at. It would help your own reasoning, because by looking at the reasoning of others repeatedly, you can, especially if you're in a class like this where you're learning on improving your own reasoning, by looking at the reasoning of others and assessing the reasoning of others, you tend to improve your own reasoning as well. All through note-taking. Look at that. One little thing that you can do that would really sort of rapidly improve your writing by firming up the ground that you're standing on when you're producing it. So I, in the announcement that I will send out after posting this video lecture, I will include a note-taking prompt. I don't think I've sent it out to you before, but a note-taking prompt that you can use that should help those of you that are wondering, well, how can I improve my note-taking? This prompt is something that you can use. It's got a series of questions on it, answering most, if not all, the questions for the readings that you encounter, the argumentative readings that you encounter, as well as possible, as fully as possible, would be a great way for you to sort of inculcate good note-taking practices into your writing process. For those of you that are struggling with note-taking or that are like, oh my gosh, how do I improve my note-taking? That prompt should help you, so I'll go ahead and make that available to you. I also wanted to talk about enthemes and thesis statements just very, very, very briefly. A thesis statement, all of us know, is the main assertion, right, of a piece of written argumentation or any argument. It's what the argument is saying. What are you arguing, right? And then the reasons or the points that you have in the body of the essay, they basically boil down to, well, why do you think your argument is valid and true? What are your reasons for thinking that this thesis statement is valid and true, right? Make sense? Those are your points. We call them reasons in college. Together they constitute what's referred to as an essay's reasoning. Thesis statement. What are you arguing? Reasoning. Why do you believe the thesis statement to be valid and true, right? Typically speaking, you are taught in high school to articulate your thesis statement. Some students are also taught that when they articulate their thesis statement, they have to sort of telegraph what they're going to do in the body of the essay by basically including their points in their thesis statement. If you've been taught this way, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It ends up producing really long, kind of distended thesis statements that include everything that you're going to talk about in the essay, rather than just delivering the main assertion of the essay. Enthymemes work a little bit differently. An enthymeme is a pretty old word. It's a Greek word. It's a really old word, and it basically means a sentence in which you communicate your thesis statement and your reasoning for a piece of argumentation. So typically speaking, in an enthymeme, and the ways that we'll be building them in this class, is that what's kind of central to them is that you have your thesis statement, right? And your thesis statement is followed by the word because, and after the word because is a summary, not a listing of your reasons, but a summary of the reasons that you have in your argument for why your thesis statement should be considered valid and true. So let's say my argument is, I have an argument, the topic of the argument is SUVs. And let's say that my argument, after looking through a bunch of sources and doing all the research and arriving at a good argument, I have arrived at the argument. My original question, my research question was, are SUVs really worth it? Are they worth the cost? They're more expensive. Why makes them better than cars? Like, are they really worth the purchase? They're more expensive than cars, right? So after all that, I have my thesis statement. After all that research, I've arrived at a stance. And my stance is that SUVs are worthwhile purchase. And I have 3 different reasons. They are spacious, they have great towing packages, and they are great off-road. All 3 of those things together basically means that SUVs are convenient. So SUVs are a great purchase. Thesis statement. SUVs are a great purchase because SUVs are convenient. Enthymeme. So that's kind of a brief overview of how enthymemes work. We'll talk more about why they're important or why they're worthwhile later in the term. But for right now, just know that that's the difference between enthymemes and thesis statements. Okay. Sorry about that. I had to split this clip up. So that was the enthymemes and thesis statements. You have 2 assignments coming up, the reading analysis and the synthesis essay. As I've mentioned before, your assignments in this class are scaffolded, meaning that they are set up so that they lean into one another. Your reading analysis helps prepare you for the synthesis essay. The 2 assignments together help prepare you for essay number 1, that sort of a thing. And I've been talking about the importance of annotation and note-taking. Well, the reading analysis is really sort of, for those of you that aren't particularly schooled in good solid note-taking, the reading analysis will test your ability to summarize, to paraphrase, and it will also ask you to take a look at the argument that's being covered and start thinking about it in terms of the questions that it poses or the questions that you have at the end of it. That last step is really important. That's an element of what we refer to as inquiry-driven written argumentation or scholarship. And you'll find the more you do scholarship, the more sort of immersed you get in scholarship. For those of you especially that aren't seniors, who aren't seniors, the more scholarship you engage with, the more you'll see that we are often asking in scholarship, asking more questions than we are answering those questions. We try to answer questions as much as possible, but scholarship itself is very inquiry-driven, and I think that for a lot of students that can be a bit of a surprise. But anyways, the reading analysis is meant to help prepare you for that aspect or element of scholarship, but also meant to help you give you some practice and some important skills in note-taking, i.e. summary and paraphrase, which I've already discussed both of those, and direct quotations, use and integration of direct quotations. So I believe, yeah, let's see here. Yeah, and that's about it for the reading analysis for these. Now for the synthesis essay, it builds on skills that you work on in the reading analysis, but as you will see when you encounter the synthesis essay, or if you look a little bit forward and take a look at the prompt for that assignment, you'll see that the goal there is actually discussing, is not just taking notes on one source, but it's trying to establish connections between 2 arguments that may or may not have obvious connections in the first place. That's an important element of what's referred to as synthesis, which I've already mentioned. The goal with synthesis, I'll just kind of give a quick breakdown of it, is typically speaking with synthesis, it happens when you are doing research and you encounter articles that are operating within, roughly speaking, the same discourse community, but they're not necessarily talking about exactly the same thing. Synthesis is the ability to see the ways in which the arguments overlap, intersect, or speak to one another's concerns, and exploiting those observations about those connections in the pursuit of producing your own pieces of written argumentation, or in using those sources to help generate the arguments that you produce. So that's a little bit of a ways in the future. Right now, I want you to focus on the reading analysis, and just keep in mind that there are skills that you're working on in this reading analysis that will those skills will be important to you in the synthesis essay that you have coming up. I think that's about all I wanted to talk about in this video. I'm just kind of taking a look back at my notes. I believe, yep, that's it. So if you have any questions about anything, please let me know. But that's it for today, and thanks again. I will. I look forward to talking with you again soon. Thank you. Bye.